Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. We are here in very sunny January and we're having a summertime over in Panama City in the real Panama, not Panama City, Florida. And I am talking to the most solar person in all of Panama. This is Juan Andrés Navarro. He is a lot of different things, but for one thing, he is the CEO of a company called NSolar. So that's like the letter N with solar after it. He also does a lot of things for the Solar Chamber of Commerce here in Panama, which I think is it sort of like SEIA is in the US?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that.
It's like the group that represents the industry.
Yeah, and I kind of like that how you call it the Solar Chamber of Commerce. Maybe we should do that too. We could SEIA, change your name. And how about like other things too, like the regular Chamber of Commerce? Are you involved with that?
Yeah, I'm also in the regular, as you say, Chamber of Commerce, and that one, just as you said, that the solar was representing the industry. This one is basically the voice of the private sector, to say. Yeah.
Great, awesome. And so the way that this ended up happening is I met with Juan and a whole bunch of Juans, because I think about half the people in his company are named Juan. And how many Juan Carloses? Is there like 3 of you?
There's at least 3 in the group that I'm remembering in that Starbucks in Anaheim.
Yeah, and then your father too, right?
Oh yes, of course. He wasn't there, but he's a 4th one.
The 4th one. Okay, so there's like 4 Juan Carloses. So pretty much, I just call everybody here Juan. And in fact,
it's easier.
Yeah, and my name Sean is John, which is Juan. So Sean is John or Juan in Irish. So
I'll take that into consideration when I go to Ireland.
And then the other thing that I thought was interesting is there was actually 2 Juan Carlos Navarros. One of them is your father, who's kind of high up there. He is the Minister of the Environment.
Yes.
And he gave me this really cool book here. So, check out on Instagram. We're shaking hands and it's got his signature in here. So there it is.
And I was there. He did give it to you. I can attest to that.
And then there's another one on the company. And
with the same name.
With the exact same name. And they're like, they just say they're distantly related or something. Is that it?
Yeah,
so
very distantly. I think it's a huge coincidence. And yeah, my father started the company 10 years ago with this cool guy that he's now our friend and partner. They have the exact same name. They're not directly related. And the 3rd guy, Alejandro Diaz. Those 3 guys started NSolar. I've been in the company for about 8 years. And then 1 year after I came, Juan Carlos Arango, who you also met, he also integrated in the company. He's also a partner. And he's doing the sales and commercial side of NSolar. And yeah, since we started the company, we got our certifications, NABCEP stuff.
Yep.
We got our NABCEP stuff done right. I think we were the only ones, and still are the only ones in Panama that comply. Not only do we have NABCEP certifications, but we also comply with the current NEC in the US.
The NEC, they call it NEC.
Yeah, the NEC, we call it NEC.
Let me just educate people about that too. So if you call the NEC NEC, then that is called an acronym. And if you call it the NEC, that's called an abbreviation. So usually people say acronym when they mean abbreviation. Yeah, I do it too. So
me too, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, we comply with the NEC 2023, and we like saying to our customers that a system that I install here in Panama is a system that I could install easily in the US or in a place that has higher standards. And these practices, plus others, I mean, we only install microinverters and such. These practices have made our prices a bit higher than the competition, but after 10 years, I can tell you that sometimes cheaper is not better, because our systems 10 years after are still generating above what we had intended them to do. And this is definitely to do with not only the quality of the installation, but the installation itself, all those practices that we learn, not only in NABCEP, but in courses like that can really make a system last the 25 years that it should.
Yeah, and I could tell that you're a high quality company. For one thing, you hired me to come out here to do NABCEP training, get people qualified to take different NABCEP exams. And so that, just means you're doing a little bit extra. And also things like following the NEC very carefully and the 2023 NEC and rapid shutdown and all that stuff. So a lot of your competitors aren't doing that kind of thing. They're not going for rapid shutdown. They're just going for what they can get away with. And they perhaps won't be around as much as you guys are around, backing up things with warranties and all that kind of stuff. One thing I remember too, when I first met you over in Anaheim that was at the RE Plus conference, you called for a meeting, and then all of a sudden all the Juans showed up. and I remember I met you in Starbucks in the Hilton, and we're in a Hilton right now, so it's like kind of a.
They should be paying some
I know
money to your podcast, maybe.
I know, at least you get another upgrade.
For a product mentioning.
Or we're going to do Marriott, buddy. So anyway, so we met there, and we decided to, you guys asked me to come here, and we went through some different rounds of emails and things like that. And you're really interested in getting NABCEP certified, and you guys are a B Corp. So that's like a benefit corporation.
Yeah.
And it's like a voluntary certification for a corporation. It's not something that's a government thing. Like, I guess that's why you could do it down here in a different country. It's not like a state thing. It's not like something that you put on your IRS forms back in the US. That means that you're helping the people. Some people talk about like the different P's, the planet, the people, and then the profits. So.
Yeah, after we did the NABCEP stuff, the B Corp certification for us, it was very natural and organic. Our company was a B Corp before it was certified as a B Corp.
Great.
The practices that we have, not only the product that we sell and the services that we provide, that naturally it helps the planet and it helps fight climate change, but also the way that we treat our fellow workers. The way we treat our customers, who we do business with, who is my provider, We usually try to work with the best people, and not only quality, we like to know. I've been to all the factories that we purchase items from. I'm actually missing maybe one in New Mexico. But yeah, we've been to China, to the factories that deliver to us. And just going into the whole B Corp movement and getting all our information in order to send to the B Corp lab in the US. For us, it was a great experience. It helped remind us of the good things that we do, maybe some things that we can do better. We got organized for this certification, of course, and now we're just spreading the word about B Corps. There's a lot of companies, you remember Patagonia?
Patagonia, yeah.
You were going to mention that?
I put on my Patagonia jacket right now.
You had one, yeah.
It's a little bit warm.
Yeah, and it won't get cold, believe me. But yeah, that brand, Patagonia, is one of the first B Corps. And the ex-owners, I think, is one of the ones that invented the B Corp movement.
Great. And so another thing, too, that I remember that you mentioned when I first met you is that at one point in time, you installed the world's largest microinverter system. So how big was that? And maybe just kind of tell me how that went.
Yeah, so I mean, since the beginning, as I said earlier, and just to clarify, NSolar is a solar EPC. We install...
And you mostly are doing rooftop.
We mostly, we mostly do rooftop.
Commercial and residential.
Commercial and residential, mostly rooftop. But about 9 or 8 years ago, a client came to us and asked us, hey, I want to do a 2 megawatt solar farm and I want to do it with you guys. And we said, sure, but we only install microinverters. We don't do DC cabling, we don't do string inverters, we don't do anything like that. So we put in about 8,000 panels of, I think it was 200 watts. I think the total capacity was like 2.4 megas. Each one with one Enphase microinverter at the time.
2.4 megawatts.
2.4
megawatts.
megawatts.
That's a lot of microinverters. How many was that?
8,000.
8,000
exactly.
microinverters.
Yeah.
And I'm sure none of them broke, right?
No, none of them.
Out of 8,000,
some of them,
that was a joke.
Some of them had some communication issues. But yeah, even the CEO of Enphase came over to Panama to inaugurate do the inauguration stuff. And it was a great moment. Ever since, we have done some systems that are like 1 megawatt on a rooftop, which is almost, for me, is as impressive because a rooftop that size, is incredible.
It's like acres of rooftops.
Exactly. And I think I haven't mentioned this, but Last year we did a project that was very interesting that we got to mix. It was in a factory, in a bread factory here in Panama. And we put some solar and we also put a sun-grow battery. I think it was maybe 2.2 megawatts inside of a container. And then we also did some Schneider UPS systems, like 1.2 megas of that.
Uh-huh.
It's because
So the UPS, and you say 1.2, that's megawatts?
Yes.
And how about megawatt hours? Is it like similar?
I think it's similar, but I would have to confirm. And I do know that this factory was having issues with the quality of the energy it was receiving, and some of the machinery would respond by resetting for 30 minutes. So what we did is we basically, the first responder is the UPS system, the 1.2 megas. That'll probably give like 10 to 12 minutes of power. But before that power is drained, the battery would come in for about 2 hours, and then the backup of the backup would be some diesel generators. That project for me was very, very interesting. And I think we will be looking forward to do many projects like that here in Panama. We haven't really peaked in storage industrial.
Great. So one of the things too that you have here in Panama is you have the same grid as the US, and that's kind of common throughout like any place north of here, and even I guess probably somewhat south. In a lot of different countries, very similar in the Philippines. And so, but what you have here is 60 cycles per second. So that's 60 hertz, the grid. Most of the world is 50 hertz. And then when I plug something into the wall, it's 120. When it goes to a house, it's 240. When it's a commercial building, it's 120, 208, or 277, 480. So it's pretty much the same thing. And
Panama is very Americanized, as you say.
And I was actually like really surprised when I came here, from what I've seen mostly, is it didn't seem very third world at all. In fact, sometimes underneath a bridge where I live, you'll, like a bridge or like under by a freeway, it'll be a lot more third world there. The people living in tents and stuff like that.
There are places everywhere, I think.
Yeah, and I did see a little bit when we went out of town and stuff like that. But it seems like just like a super nice place. I feel completely safe around here, so people should come and visit.
Thanks for saying that. And I totally agree. We use the American dollar as currency, so
like,
it's easy.
Do you have your own currency or something? I just like kind of read it, but I've never seen it.
Technically, there is one type of currency called the Balboa, but the change is 1-to-1, and they don't print bills. So it might just say it like in theory, but the practice.
So it's 1-to-1, so you can't go printing more like we do in the U.S. Just print more. You need more money, just print it.
So I've heard.
So that's like we can sort of tax you by printing money, so a little bit of a benefit there. Yeah, so it seems like being in the U.S. in a lot of ways, it's just like most everybody I've talked to speaks English very well. I could walk into any place and just start talking English in any store and, no problem at all. So
and I also think that the way of doing business, and I know that in your visit to Panama, you have attended other business that is not only solar, and you can tell it's very straightforward business. It's very similar to the U.S. And here in Panama, we have a democratic government. A lot of things we do similar than in the U.S. And Panama, just geographically, the position we're at, we have the Canal, we have both oceans. We connect via, if we can drive a car, we're in the Pacific right now. If we drive a car up north, we'll be in the Atlantic in about an hour. This is a country that has a lot of advantages in logistics. And I think our partnership with you and with the whole industry leaders will definitely give the whole country a boost. Right now, we only represent about 2% of all the consumption in Panama.
But so electricity consumption, PV, and we've been talking quite a bit about that. So it goes back to some like ancient law from way back from
1997.
And
did you say that people did in those days?
Yeah. It's like, I think I was riding a horse. What type of
car did you say?
Horse and buggy times. I mean, as far as like, the growth of technology and everything like that. And it's like, for 1997, 2% was like.
Sounds great.
It was like 1,000 times more than what people had there. It was
plus
like
the PV prices at the time were astronomers, it couldn't be done.
It was like probably in 1997, there's as much solar in the whole country as there is like on your house or something like that.
Exactly.
Or at least the house of like the people in your company, those houses. So the industry has grown a lot. And then the other thing too is I think that 2% is even misleading, because when you say that, I was looking more into the law with you, and it's like you're comparing peak inverter capacity if everything was clipping. And so what clipping means is like, usually what you do is you have a design and you go like, okay, I'm going to do 1.4 to 1. And I'm going to have 40% more PV than inverter. And then on the sunniest day of the year, it's going to make as much as the inverter can put out. And so that's called clipping, when you could have put out more. But typically, you're not clipping. I mean, it's rare to clip, and that 1.4 to 1 or 1.3 to 1, 1.2 to 1, usually it's somewhere in that range. And the reason that they even have a ratio like that confuses people a lot of times, is because of the way that they rate PV. So you could see that it's nice and sunny here, suckers, because we're in Panama and you're experiencing 0-degree temperatures in the States right now. And so that heat, and you get that heat and it lowers the voltage and it reduces your performance a little bit. And so standard test conditions of PV is the way they rate the PV, which is overly optimistic, because usually you don't have 1,000 watts per square meter, and the cell temperature of the PV module would have to be, or I should say the solar cells, would be 25 degrees Celsius, which is 77 Fahrenheit. And I can tell right now that I'm probably getting hit with something like 500 watts per square meter, and it's a whole lot hotter than 25 degrees Celsius. You know, especially it would be on a solar cell or something like that. So anyway, so you get these ratios, and then things will clip. And so it just means it, like, they call it clipping power. That's just the term that they use. And so you're relating, like, if every inverter in the whole country was clipping power to the most energy that the grid ever used for, you know, like in any period of time, which might not even be when the sun's out. I mean,
I think it's punishing the solar users.
So if you were doing it a different way, it might be 1% if you like calculated that percent a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, just like 1 or 2%, that's, I mean, maybe a lot of places, that's how much they're increasing the solar capacity every year, every 6 months, something like that. So it's like a very limiting factor. And it sounded good back when you were like 0.0002%, or even less than that when they started it way back in 1997. But I think that you could use a change. And so what's going to happen if, you know, is it going to like put all the solar workers out of business if they don't change it? But kind of what happened in all the other places that I've been to, which is the United States and a lot of other places, they increase that percentage. I mean, it's just kind of like a natural thing that seems to happen. It's like you got to take one step before you take 100.
Yeah. Totally. And I mean, just thinking about not even the science behind it, just the politics behind it, because it's always a factor. It would almost be political suicide to approve or to say yes to a law that puts solar out of work, you know?
Yeah.
And solar, I mean the whole industry, not only the installers, you know. In Panama, we have a bunch of distributors, we have people that do maintenance, you know, it's an industry that is growing. In the solar chamber, we have more than 100 companies now as members. And yeah, I believe that this law will definitely be changed. I'm looking at something like, if I had to guess what would be the right thing to do, probably do a 10% limit, maybe revise it every year. I've heard of cases like California 40%, Hawaii also I think about 40%. And yeah, we have a lot of fights at the same time, as I have told you. Not only are we trying to push that 2% limit, which is absurd, I'm trying to get rid of it, not only push it back. Because it just doesn't make any sense.
Or maybe we could make it 2% of the world's capacity could be in Panama.
That sounds great to me. And yeah.
So it'll still be 2%. It'll just be 2% of the world.
Of what? Exactly. And our question right now is 2% of what? Okay. And why does it exist? And as I was saying to you, we are having some issues with some lobbies from some distributors and utility companies that are trying to change our net metering law. And they are trying to argue in favor of what they say is a subsidy by the solar users to the non-solar users. So we've had to explain about 100 times a week that the advantages of distributed generation and solar companies like us and solar users, whenever we have excedent and we take that power out of our property, the utility company probably sells that energy to my next door neighbor who is using the energy.
Yep, without having to transmit it over long distances.
Without,
and,
exactly, no system losses, no usage of transformers and other
not having to build new power plants that you turn on for an hour a year.
Exactly.
Peaker plants.
So I'm sure that the benefits outweigh the costs completely, but there are still some people trying to lobby in favor of having some sort of solar tax. That's what we call it.
The anti-solar lobby.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll call it the lunar lobby.
Yeah, the lunar lobby.
It's the vampires, the moon people.
They're trying to get energy from the moon. They haven't figured out a way. Yeah, I mean, going against solar is ridiculous, and you can try, but the prices are going to keep dropping. You're going to be able to buy solar from anywhere in the world. You can buy it from the US, you can buy it from China, you can buy it from India. There's a bunch of places that are specializing,
Yeah, one way I look at it too is it just like economics. And it's going to prevail. It just how much trouble is or somebody going to give the solar industry on its way up, the anti-solar people. So solar energy is the least expensive energy. It's renewable. You don't need to depend on other countries. And so right now, you don't produce fossil fuels in Panama, right?
Yep, we currently don't because we don't have any right now.
Yep. And so what are you going to do? It's nice to be self-sufficient. Another thing too that I was thinking about too is like, what if you had 200%? So we increased 2% times 100. What would you do with that extra energy? There's lots of different things that we could do with it. And here we have this thing that has all these locks called the Panama Canal. And they have droughts that I've read about. And that means that they can't let as many ships through. And if they can't let the ships through, then that means they have to take the long route, which is how some of my ancestors got from Europe to the US. But the long route means going, below the tip of South America or some other way instead of going through the canal, which is really bad for the environment because they're like shooting up all that smoke into the air and, making everybody cough and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So you can take that solar energy, that extra solar energy, and pump it up to the reservoir, or you could call it, I guess it's a lake reservoir, same thing, for that purpose, and then you can let more ships through.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that idea that you had, I saw it in your presentation. It's genius, and we definitely need more ideas like that. Water pumping is definitely a way that we can use that excess. And right now, there's people talking about building aqueducts all the way to the canal from outside of the city to supply the country with fresh water. So the pumping will be essential in the next few years.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Fresh water for us is key.
Because it's kind of interesting how a lock works. And so what they're doing is they take water and then they coming from a higher place to a lower place. The ship goes into the lock when it's low, when the water's low. Then it floods it, it raises the ship, and it can raise like these huge ships. So it's pretty amazing how that technology works. And I know it's not just for the Panama Canal. They have them in different places throughout all the world, but this is pretty much the most famous one, or I guess in some ways.
At least in the US or in this continent, it's
well,
the most
I guess the
famous.
other one is the Suez Canal.
Yeah, and that has a lot of traffic as well.
Yep, and I guess too, like if the Suez Canal broke, that would be good for Panama, right?
Yeah, but I think we've learned that it's bad for everyone.
Yeah.
You remember when that ship got stuck? It was like a domino effect.
Did you get more business here?
No, because it's like a chain or like a domino effect. The whole worldwide logistic chain was affected.
Yeah.
Because some ships that are supposed to come here had to go there first or something like that.
Oh yeah, just sort of like when there's a storm in the U.S., and it's affecting the East Coast, and then the flights are late that are like going to some unconnected city because one plane goes here, goes there, and all that kind of stuff. I did also read something, I was actually reading the book that your father gave me. They build ships, like a lot of these container ships, just to fit through these canals.
Yeah.
Like they have the maximum size. Like they
post-Panamax.
Yeah. And there's Panamax, and what's the bigger one now? Because
I think it's called post-Panamax.
Okay.
But I'll double check.
Yep.
Yeah, and Panama, I think a few years ago, like 5 or maybe 10 years ago, the government made a big investment and it built a set of new locks. And these new locks were able to get ships of bigger sizes because Panamax was the max back in the day. In the original locks, you can only fit those type of ships.
So I have another question too. So like when you let the water down from one level to another to fill up the lock, do they ever try to, take that energy of the water flowing from one lock to another and generate electricity with that? Maybe it's not long enough of a distance to make a difference, but I just thought that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. And the Canal Authority here in Panama, they had a floating solar farm, and they are definitely in the renewable energy vibe and world. So I think it would be a possibility to do the study. Yeah, they're going renewables all the way for sure.
Yeah, and another thing too, I was just thinking, is just instead of filling up the lock from gravity, from uphill, if you have extra solar energy, because we've gone from 2% to 200% in this ideal world,
pump it.
You just pump the water to fill up the lock, you know? So let's do it.
I'll get you an appointment with the Canal.
And so this is, of course, related to pumped hydroelectric storage, which the last time I checked, there was more pumped hydro storage than anything in the world, so way more than lithium-ion batteries. However, that's changing very fast because we're getting a lot more storage in the world, because we're getting a lot more solar in the world. Another thing too that I would just like to mention that I oftentimes talk about is what does happen when you have more solar energy than the grid can use. And so one of the things that can happen with that is they curtail power. So they essentially just turn off the power. And so I know that at some point I've read articles where like California is curtailing $1 billion a year worth of electricity. And that's just like an order of magnitude. I'm not being exact or anything like that. And the other thing besides curtailing power is energy storage. And then another thing that you can do is, one of the things that has been a concern since they invented the duck curve, many of you have heard of the duck curve in California, where they say that you need to have a certain amount of on the grid that's made by, they're saying fossil fuels, or at least it's like big rotating machinery for this inertia. So if something happens and it's all inverter based, and you have like the old style inverters from, back 20 years ago, they're just grid following inverters. So they see the grid and they respond to it. And so it doesn't have the inertia, or they call it spinning reserves and things like that, as you would have with a standalone inverter, or that you have with this rotating machinery when you have like a coal plant, a nuclear power plant, a natural gas plant. You have these big, huge, heavy things that are spinning. And so we can duplicate that with what they call synthetic inertia, with what's called a grid forming inverter. And one of the things that we don't really have right now is even policy to get the benefits from a grid forming inverter. So we technically have the technology, we just don't really have the policy to have a 100% renewable grid. I mean, just think about it with just somebody that lives off grid. They have a 100% renewable grid. They have a battery, then they have what's called a standalone inverter. So a standalone inverter is kind of the analogy to a grid forming inverter. In fact, you could just really say it's a grid forming inverter. However, we use the term grid forming to mean something that's connected to the grid that acts like something that's big and that's spinning. One of the things that's kind of interesting to me too is when you have all these things on just like a regular grid, a non-inverter grid, you get one thing spinning and then you turn on another coal plant, another coal plant, and they sync with each other, which is kind of cool. And that's one of the things that these synthetic inertia grid forming inverters can do, is they sync with each other just that way. In fact, there's some things that you can do better than with these other types of archaic synthetic inertia, of these big spinning things. And we can change the power factor, and we can improve upon the spinning things, because now we have the computer chip, we have technology. So it's all a matter of just like, how do we coordinate these things? Are we going to have grid forming inverters on our houses? They're 5 kilowatt inverters, things like that. And yeah, it's like, we do have the technology to do stuff like that, but we do need the policy, and we need to talk the utilities into it. So you look at a utility and it's like, they're a natural monopoly. Utility is making billions of dollars, and they've been doing it for a long time. And if they keep everything just going the way it is, it's good for the executives' job security, because they're making a profit and they're the natural monopoly and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of hard to pivot to the renewable energy, future. And so we just kind of have to help these people a little bit and educate them, because probably when you're talking to the people that are working at those companies, they're all, mostly good people too.
Yeah, definitely. They probably also want solar panels so that they can pay $0 in electricity bill.
Yep. And then they probably also get lobbied by people that are selling those fossil fuel molecules. Yeah.
I also think that, like you say, most of them are good people. Yeah, they just have a job, a good paying job, and that's it. Most of those people don't even advocate for the utility. It's just a job.
Yeah.
Like you said, I mean, people are looking for more independence. The only way or the cheapest way to get energy independence, which nowadays is even more important to some than actual safety. I mean, having internet is more safe nowadays than having an actual line, like a phone line,
Yeah.
I don't even have a phone line in my house.
Yeah.
So I think
me neither.
Yeah, right?
I don't even have a TV. Yeah.
You should probably get a TV.
I mean, just like I got the internet.
I mean, your computer is your TV now.
I got Netflix.
Yeah. They can also be a part of your marketing campaign. So yeah, I think that people are going to be looking for more independence and a way to be self-dependent or just doing self-consumption, And obviously solar panels, and with good policy and trips like this that you're doing here to Panama, we visited some government offices as well. And we're definitely going to push forward for better policy, better condition, better terms, better incentives. And I think we have proved that in economies that are welcoming to renewable energy, those economies tend to grow faster, because the fact is that they are more efficient. Instead of spending millions of dollars on gas or electricity bills, they are spending it in more assets for their own products and more business,
Yeah, it's sort of like you look at an economy too. It's like, do you want to keep that economy that's yours growing, or do you want to send it all to some place where they make the tallest buildings in the world? I mean, it's like, it's nice, those tallest buildings in the world and things like that, but it's not very sustainable, and it makes people extremely rich in different places, and they kind of like being extremely rich. I don't really blame them. They're probably good people too, but they just happen to have been born in some place where underground there's all these fossil fuels, and they can take all those fossil fuels and sell them to us, and then we can drive around and fly and make our grid work and all that kind of stuff. But we're seeing the energy transition, and we're seeing solar and other renewables take off and make this planet the future. We're seeing the future.
Yeah, good point.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show.
The reason why we have been so successful, not only is it because we have a group of Juans.
The most excellent ones.
Thank you.
And we all went fishing too. We actually had one person on the boat though that was not a Juan.
Yeah, we gave him a pass.
Yeah. Or we could change his name. Yeah.
And I have to accept that you did catch some fish. So if anyone is wondering if you did or didn't. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that we have been so successful is not only by our team and our quality, but also by very good laws, or at least fair laws. In Panama right now, we have a net metering law that basically does 1-to-1. So per 1 kilowatt hour that you inject, you get 1 kilowatt hour in credit. And
and so is the kilowatt hour, are you on time of use here at all, or it's just
no
like
time
flat?
of use, it's flat rate.
So yeah, and so like what happens in a lot of places, just like my utility bill, I have what's called net metering 1, and somebody also with net metering 2, which it's time of use. They get full credit, but then the price of electricity changes, and so they actually, it's not per kilowatt hour, but it's per price. But if you have flat rates, it's all the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, like I said, one of the reasons is this very fair law, and it's been going strong. It does need some improvement, but
And yeah, and it's just like, it's so little of your electricity is made from solar compared to the places that I'm used to going. So it's like, got to hand it to you for sticking with the solar industry and watching it grow. And I would hope that it grows more. It's just, it's good for business, good for the environment, and good for homemade electricity.
totally. I think with more trips from you, we will definitely keep growing.
And one thing too that I just want to say that people should do all over the world, including where I live and every other place, is when you make changes to policy, do them gradual as far as like putting people out of business. And so one of the things that happened in California is they made a big sudden change. They went from net metering 2 to net billing 3, and they went from a policy where you get full credit for exporting to something like on the magnitude of 10% of what, and so
That's
it was
brutal.
almost like somewhere around a tenfold decrease for exporting, and it put something like 15,000 people on the unemployment line. So there's like all these
That's
like
brutal.
good people, solar jobs, and then they're on the solar coaster. And then what happens is the price of electricity goes up, and then the price of energy storage goes down, and it'll come back. But it was just the suddenness of the change that is bad, which gives our industry a reputation of being a solar coaster. So quick changes in policy are bad. A lot of you have probably watched The Terminator, and we had ourselves a governor. And our governor was really good for solar energy. They called him the Jolly Green Governor and things like that. And one of the things that he was working with was called the California Solar Initiative. And this was a long time ago. And, like probably 2000, I can't remember, it was like 2006 maybe was when he first got elected, if I had to guess. Somewhere around there within a couple of years. And one of the things that he did, that he worked with, was they called it steps. And so they decreased the incentive in steps. And one of the things that happened is the price of all the equipment, for instance, was going down and the incentive was going down. And they did it at about the same rate, so it didn't cause a solar coaster.
Yeah,
So they decreased the incentive with steps.
that's
And
very smart.
And so the industry actually grew while they were decreasing the incentive because they decreased it gradually.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I think that's the way to do it. And also I mean, since we're talking about only 2%, of consumption, right now we should probably not be trying to limit solar in Panama. I would probably start worrying about that when it's up to 25% or 40%. Right now, I think we should start getting ready our grid, probably modernizing the grid and get ready for EVs, get ready for more solar, and just focus on that.
And also too, like one of these things about modernizing the grid, like a lot of people would think like, oh, that's expensive and things like that. But modernizing the grid to me, a lot of times means distributed generation, which is what you're doing, rooftop solar, making it where you're using it. And that actually makes it so you don't need to upgrade the infrastructure as much. So we do have lots of, transformers that are really old and things like that, but they work in reverse. And if you're not sending all the power from one location and to send it out to everybody else, but you're making it where everybody's using it and coordinating all those things. And so we have things that are like, it's sort of like a natural evolution of the grid. So first you start off kind of where you are, where you're just some little fraction of the grid, or I remember when we were just a fraction of a percent. And so you try to give incentives. I know like Germany pretty much started the grid tie solar revolution, and they had something called the feed-in tariff. And they were paying people a lot more for their solar energy than people paid for electricity. And then as time goes on, the price of solar goes down, and then they change the policy. And they do have the most experienced solar industry in the world over in Germany. And another place that's doing really well as far as that goes too is Australia. So Australia has a lot of solar on the grid. I think they, as far as a country goes, or at least a normal sized country, I think they have more solar than anyone the last time I checked. So
makes sense. The US should probably try and give them a battle.
Yeah, I know.
You have great climate for that.
I know, that's a great idea. And so, yeah, we are having a little bit of politics right now, and I try to like
So I've heard.
personally stay neutral in politics, and like people can guess on how I am. But one of the things too that I've noticed is like, of course, the solar industry has a reputation for being more like Democrat than Republican and things like that. But I know a ton of people in the solar industry that are Republican and like Trump supporters and stuff like that, and they're putting a lot of solar in red states and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because it just makes it's a good business.
Yeah.
I think we can keep leaving politics out, and solar, distributed generation, and storage will continue to grow with or without support. With or without politics. It just makes sense. It's good business. Like you were saying earlier, installing solar is cheaper than even operating an existing power plant, thermic power plant. It's the cheapest way of making electricity.
And then also in the news here too is there's this thing right over here called the Canal, and whose is that anyway? No, I was kidding.
Well, it depends on who you ask.
I was afraid that I was going to come here and I was going to get like, you American, and people were going to start like attacking me and things like that.
Maybe they were going to think you're a spy.
Yeah, they think I'm a spy and all that stuff. And then I was like saying like, when are the fighter jets going to show up? But it seems like everybody here is like very friendly to me, and I hope that it doesn't turn into be some kind of whatever it would be. I don't know. I don't even want to say, but
let's just hope it continues to be a political game.
Yeah, just a political game. Yeah, just like playing some Monopoly and things like that.
Looking forward, we all always wish for both countries to have a great relationship and continue growing forward, without looking back at who said what, maybe it's a negotiating tactic, I don't know.
Yeah,
but
negotiating tactic.
Panama is a natural ally to the U.S. and will continue to be. You guys are our northern neighbors, our big brother.
And I know one time earlier in the conversation you were talking about the north side is the Atlantic side. And so a lot of us think that like North America, South America doesn't go east to west, but actually the canal does go more north to south. So Panama is kind of sideways. So if you go out there and look at a map, it goes kind of sideways. And another thing too I was going to talk about is, do you have any interconnections with your country that goes towards the South American side, which is Colombia? And this used to be Colombia, I guess. And I don't think there's going to be any grid connections there because there's kind of a jungle that's supposed to be dangerous. You wouldn't take me there, unfortunately.
I wouldn't. But yeah, we do have in our western border with Costa Rica, we have a transmission line.
Transmission line to Costa Rica.
Yeah. Currently, there is not one between Panama and Colombia because of what you just said. There's the Darién Gap.
Darién Gap, yeah.
Yes. But there is an approved project to connect Panama and Colombia. I think they're going to have to go by ocean around the jungle.
Because that jungle is
totally inaccessible.
Okay.
You would have to destroy more nature and ruin more it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I always thought that's very interesting that you have that. So you pretty much could drive all the way down there. Like, so from North America to South America, except for this jungle between here and Colombia.
Yeah.
And it's like there's so many more jungles that have made roads through. And maybe there's a reason for that too, that you just don't want everybody coming through, or...
Yeah, maybe historically when Panama and Colombia got separated, they wanted that natural gap or that buffer, yeah. And then, I guess in the 80s and 90s, the Colombians had some security issues. I don't know if you remember the FARC or the guerrillas.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So it just always stayed like that. My father would never allow anything to be built there.
Okay.
And most people that like the environment, I think, feel the same.
Yeah. So that's something that your father's kind of in charge of because he's the Minister of the Environment? Yeah.
Well, that also has to do with the country's defense and the border patrol and such. But it's got to do with the environment.
So
for sure.
Say that somebody wants to drive or ride their motorcycle or their bicycle from North to South America.
You would have to probably take
there a ferry?
Yeah.
Like, is there some place where you can just drive to right here in Panama City and load your RV onto a ferry and then take it down to Colombia?
If it's an RV, you probably will need to go from Panama City to Colombia. But if it's like a smaller thing like a bike, you could probably drive farther east, closer to Colombia, and then get a smaller boat. Yeah.
How about if I had like a BMX bike? Or can I go through the Darién Gap?
Probably, if you have like a machete and a machine gun, maybe.
So what's going on down there?
You wouldn't want to know. Like, we get a lot of migrants, unfortunately, from Venezuela, for example. They come walking north and they need to go through there in order to keep going to the US.
And so there's a lot in the news too about like closing the US borders and all that kind of stuff. And I think somebody was saying it's decreased the traffic, people coming through here. Is that like the Darién Gap and all that?
Yeah, definitely. And it's a tragedy because there are a lot of children and babies that are brought in those trips, and not everyone makes it, you know. So,
well, maybe someday that will be just a beautiful park where we can go camping. You got to get, you know.
Maybe on your next trip. I can't thank you enough, Sean, really, for your time here in Panama. And we read all your books like 3 or 4 years before we met you. And when you replied back in that email, you know, for us it meant a lot. And now having you here at our home, for us it's a blessing. I think our whole engineering team learned a lot. We're definitely doing better practices and learning each year. And yeah, let's hope that the next time we see each other, business has grown and everyone is well. So again, I want to thank you for the time, and this has been awesome.
Yeah, I hope to see you a lot more, and I believe we're going to meet up probably in California and Shanghai and back here in Panama. So
yes,
it's been great. All right.
We'll keep busy.
Okay. So is there any other things that you want to just leave everybody with, or where to find you? We'll put some links in the show notes.
Sure, yeah. Like Sean said, and thank you for watching, obviously, we're NSolar. We'll share the
social... just like the NSolar.
Yeah.
Is it .net? Is that what it is?
It is .net. And then we have like the whole Instagram and all those other social network. And yeah, I mean, if you ever want to talk to us or do business with us, you can always contact Sean or myself, and we'll be more than happy. And I'm looking forward to getting to know that training facility that we've secretly spoken about.
Okay, great.
So I'll see you again, Sean, and thank you again, and thank you everyone for watching. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Juan Andrés Navarro, and thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast, right here from Panama City, in the country of Panama. Beautiful place to be in the sunshine. Just one more thing too about speaking of that sunshine, and it's an educational thing. Although we are north of the equator, when you get close to the equator, people call it summer and winter based on the weather instead of which way the earth is tilted. And so although it is January and we are north of the equator, we're having a summertime.